It's important to understand the meanings of the words you're using, because if you don't, you're going to end up with unintended meanings in your sentences. These 3 sentences are actual examples from students in past classes, and they're also good examples of how spell check isn't always going to save you. In media writing, we use active voice sentences, not passive voice sentences, as much as we can, because they tend to be stronger, they tend to be shorter, and also they don't camouflage responsibility. Run-on sentences pop up in our writing from time to time, but fortunately it's easy to fix them. The best way is typically to turn it into 2 complete sentences. Agreement is a simple concept, but it's also very easy to make agreement errors if you're not looking out for them. Prepositional phrases can make determining agreement easier. It's easy to write something like, a team of researchers have gathered the information, because you look at researchers and think it's plural, so it should have a plural verb. The problem is that the verb actually should agree with team, not researchers, because you ignore that prepositional phrase of researchers. Singular nouns that end in S, such as economics, politics, and physics, still take singular verbs. You're not going to say economics are a required course. Also, nouns that refer to a group are called collective nouns, committees and teams and those sorts of terms. They are treated as singulars. Pronouns can lead to ambiguity. If you say Walter and Bob went to his mother for permission to stay out late, you don't know whether you're talking about Walter or Bob. So it's best to limit the use of pronouns. That doesn't mean you can never use them, but if you do use them, make sure that it's still clear. That and which are often used interchangeably, but shouldn't be, because they change meanings of sentences. Which is typically used in a clause, and if you can take out the clause without changing the meaning of the sentence, which is what you want to use to introduce it. Who and whom can be tricky, even for long-time professionals. The easiest way to figure out which one you need is to replace who or whom with a personal pronoun. If he or she sounds right, use who. If him or her sounds right, use whom. Modifiers should appear as close as possible to what they're modifying. In the confusing example, it sounds like the hands and feet of the victim are taped and lying on the back seat, but we don't know where the rest of him is. The revised version is much more clear. A dangling modifier is when what you're trying to modify is not in the sentence. In the confusing example, we don't know who's pleased with the papers. In the revised version, it's clear. Personification is giving non-human things human characteristics, and it's something we want to avoid. Hospitals don't treat people. People at hospitals treat people. Also, cars don't slam on their own brakes. You need to have a driver in there. Parallel structures need to be used to link similar ideas. She enjoys writing, researching, and reading her published work is great fun too. It needs to be revised so that last one fits in with the other two. Misspellings are easy to avoid, and they also can cause readers to doubt facts in a story. In broadcast, spelling is still important, even though the listener will never see the words. Misspellings can lead to mistakes on the air. You want to be careful with commonly misspelled or misused words. A lot is 2 words, all right is 2 words, medium is singular, media is plural, etc. Also in media writing, we typically follow formal rules for spelling. You'd say until rather than till. Also, be on the lookout for words that look or sound alike, like accept and except. Spell check isn't going to save you on those. Remember, language in media writing tends to be more formal rather than informal. Words like cop, kid, and lady aren't going to be used outside of direct quotes. Also, don't turn nouns into verbs. Just say a book was written, not authored. And also, it's important to be aware of a word's exact meaning. If you say someone was drowned, that means someone else did it to them. They didn't just fall off a boat and couldn't swim. If someone's executed, that means they were sentenced to death by a government and killed for their crimes. For things to collide, they both have to be moving, so you're not going to say that the car collided with the telephone pole. Also, a funeral by definition is a service, so you just call it a funeral. Words like naval and bus can be confusing as well. Naval with an A has to do with boats. Naval with an E has to do with your belly button. Bus with two S's actually means kiss. It's important to use strong verbs because they describe specific actions. If you say someone got something, you basically are just saying they obtained it somehow. But if you're saying they bought, won, or stole it, it's a much better verb because it tells you more information. The use of to be verbs can lead to passive sentences. Something like police officers were summoned to the scene by a neighbor can be cut down to something as simple as a neighbor called the police. Adjectives and adverbs can cause trouble because they're not objective. If you say it was not until Monday that university officials finally released a report, we're making it sound like they should have had it out sooner. Or, upon hearing about the frivolous lawsuit, the mayor made it quite clear she plans to fight the outrageous complaint. We are making three judgments. We're saying the lawsuit's frivolous, we're saying the mayor made it quite clear, and we're saying that it's an outrageous complaint. The revised version is much better. In media writing, we like to say to avoid cliches like the plague. But cliches have been so overused, they've lost their original meaning. There are a lot of cliches that crop into media writing, so try to keep an eye out for them. You don't need to say that fires are raging, or that temperatures are soaring, or adding gate to the end of Andel's name. Slang is best avoided in media writing because it has such a broad audience. Slang that means something to one group is going to mean absolutely nothing to another group. Professions often develop their own languages, but that doesn't mean it's something we need to include in our stories. Oftentimes we'll need to translate things into plain English. If a police spokesman says identification of the victim is being withheld pending notification of his next of kin, we can translate that into something much simpler. Euphemisms are vague expressions used in place of harsher terms, and they're not something we'll use. Don't say that a victim has passed away or passed on. Say he's dead. Unless there's a very compelling reason to do so, media writing typically does not include profanity. There are a couple common ways of handling profanity in quotes. One is to use expletive in brackets in place of the profanity, or you can use the first letter of the profanity and then dashes to represent the left out letters. It's very easy for statements that state the obvious to creep into our stories. If the sponsors hope the art show will attract a large crowd, that's not newsworthy. If they hope no one comes, that's something you include. Similarly, if the newly elected mayor said, "I hope to do a good job," that's not newsworthy. Of course she hopes to. If she says she's going to run the city into the ground, that's a quote you'd want to use. First-person references are not used in news stories outside of direct quotations, so be on the lookout for we's and ours and us's in your stories. Positive constructions tend to work better than negative ones. For one thing, they're typically easier to understand, and they're also shorter. You want to keep an eye out for redundancies in your stories. If you're talking about someone's salary, you can use annual or per year, but you don't need both. The rules for time references vary between print and broadcast stories. In print stories, we don't use yesterday, tomorrow, or today outside of quotes. If an event is within 7 days before or after the date of publication, use the day of the week. You'll say something will happen on Thursday, or it happened Thursday. If it's outside that period, you want to use a specific date. For broadcast, though, you can use yesterday, tomorrow, and today. The rules for tenses also differ between print and broadcast. In print, we typically use past tense. In broadcast, we typically use present tense. So for a print story, you said the mayor said something. In a broadcast story, you'd say the mayor says. However, you don't want to force it. You don't want to say police are searching for the victim last week.